Friends, good morning. I hope you had gone through the previous lessons on the concept of measurement, in which we had seen the importance of validity and reliability. Without validity and reliability, it's very difficult to adopt those instruments or measurements, and therefore your results will not be dependable. So, therefore, in your summer internship, you should be willing to try out these methods and then adopt and use only valid and reliable instruments for data collection. So in this class, we are going to see three important concepts. With that, we will be finishing off with the fifth step in the research process, namely acquiring empirical data. So today's topic is data sources, data methods, and tools of data collection. So let's start the process of research. So we are commonly seeing this slide in almost every class because this slide reminds us of various steps that uh, we have to learn through, and then so far we had already seen five important steps. In fact, we are in the last step, last topic, that's called acquiring empirical data. So in acquiring so far, we had seen the subtopics like measurement, scaling techniques, validity and reliability, sampling, data sources. Of course, we are going to see data sources, methods, and tools. So let's start with the fifth topic, that is called data sources, methods, and data collection. Now, in this last topic called data sources, methods, and tools, we have to see what is called data, and then what are the sources of data, what are the methods of data collection, and what are the tools of data collection. So if these three topics are seen, probably we are ready for the construction of the tool, and that is going to be in our next class and the next recording. So let's start with data and now, what is called data? As you all are very familiar with this word data, any information which is collected and converted to use in research for supporting research idea is called data. Now, once the data is converted into information, information is useful for decision making. So, data must go through the process of um, cleaning, process of purification, so that it results in an information which can be used for decision making. Therefore, data could be qualitative or quantitative, and both must be empirical in nature, because if the data is not in empirical in nature or number driven, it's very difficult to apply statistics, or uh, you cannot make any meaningful outcomes or generate any meaningful possibilities from this data without application of statistics. So therefore, data sources are the point of origin of the data. So from wherever they originate, that should be treated as a source. So there are two sources, namely primary and secondary. Primary source. Primary means the source which is for the first time, or the data which is generated for the first time. It is very fresh data, and it is also up to the minute data, and further extension, you are the first person to generate that data, and therefore any data that is generated for the first time by anybody, it should be treated as a primary data. Now, primary data sources are most popularly used in marketing research and HR research. And this is the very popular ones because it generates fresh, inventive, and up to the minute information the marketers and HR professionals need in order to make decisions more effectively. However, this source is very rarely used in operations and finance research areas, because in operations and finance they depend on the secondary source more than the primary source. Now, what is the need for primary data? Why do we need primary data? If these are the questions to be answered, the straightforward answer is when there is no source available, when previously data was not generated or collected or stored, so which means your problem cannot be understood in the absence of such data. And in such case, you need primary data. So therefore, you need to collect primary data. Now let's move on to the secondary source. Secondary source is also called the existing source. Now, this source could be in the form of books, encyclopedias, online databases, census data, stock market data, historical data, government websites, corporate websites, and so on. And most of this data, which is in the form of secondary source, could be used for forecasting. So therefore, why there is a need for such data? When already such data is available, why should you create a new data? That's the straight answer. So therefore, you could find secondary source of information in various balance sheets, various annual financial reports of the companies, productive reports for operations people, quality reports for operations people, government reports, government websites, published reports, government policies, company policies, procedures, and then you have a very popular database called Euromonitor, which includes sector-wise information about uh, the companies or uh, business sectors. Performance data could be found on Euromonitor. And then in our country, we have something called CMIE, Center for Monitoring of Indian Economy. So if you go to their website, you would find all the information about sectors of business economy or business um in our country. So you can go through CMIE reports that will give you periodic information about each sector of business as it performs in this country over the years. Now, as every source has its own limitation, similarly, secondary source also has its own limitation. Primary source also has its own limitation. In the sense, primary source is a very expensive method and very time consuming method. So these are the two important limitations of primary method. Whereas in secondary source, the limitations are, yeah, no doubt, there are also some limitations like it is outdated many times from the time it is generated, from the time it is published, and from the time it makes moves into your own decision folder. It would have been outdated quite many times. Not only that, it is secondary source information or secondary source data is very inconsistent in data structures because it is generated by multiple people in multiple contexts in multiple countries. Therefore, all may not have followed the same structure, same layouts of the data. And sometimes, historically, these data may not be available for some times, some countries, some years. So, therefore, incompleteness or missing data possibilities are more in secondary source. Most importantly, you would notice in the recent bank mergers in our country, the merging of customer data becomes very difficult because each bank has its own software applications, each bank has its own way of data protection, and therefore their data structures are very unique, sometimes very confusing, and therefore merging the data becomes more difficult, might generate more disastrous results. So these are some of the limitations of secondary source. With that, we move on to the methods of data. Once again, the methods are of two kinds, namely primary method and secondary method. So primary method includes interview method, questionnaire method, and observation method, whereas secondary method includes content analysis, existing statistical analysis, and review of literature analysis. So with that, now the tools of data collection. What is actually a tool? A tool could be called a device for data collection. A tool also could be called an instrument of data collection. So tool also refers to the schedules or the printouts. We can even be more specific like that in common man's language. A tool of data collection could also refer to as a simple printout with which we can go ahead for with the data collection. Now there are three tools of data collection which are under primary methods again. Now interview schedule, questionnaire, and observation schedule. So these are the two tools that we will be using for the collection of data from source. Let's start with interviews. Interview is a face-to-face device for collection of information from the respondents. In interview, you will have two kinds of people, namely interviewer and the interviewee. Interviewer is a researcher, interviewee is a participant or respondent of the research. So therefore, in an interview, There can be various types of interviews. The first one is called face-to-face interview, in which the interviewer or a researcher would have a face-to-face interaction with the respondent, and the interviewer would raise questions systematically, and then the respondent would answer to these questions one by one. Not only that, there could be another type of interview called telephonic interviews, in which there is no face-to-face interaction. So it is only the vocal interaction, or only the both the respondent as well as the interviewer would talk to each other uh, on the telephone or using any mobile device. It has its own limitations, like face-to-face interview also has its own limitations. I would want you to read all those limitations on your own. Now the next one is called computer assisted interviews. Like in case of online retail formats, for example, Flipkart and Amazon would present to you some questions after purchasing. You may have to answer some of those questions. So that could be called computer assisted interviews. And there could be interviews through electronic media also. For example, using web based technologies, an interview could be conducted. So we shall not see more elaborately on those, but interviews have their own advantages as well as disadvantages. Uh, Most important advantage could be like in an interview, you'll have fresh data source. You are the point of generation of the data, so therefore it could be more reliable. However, there could also be a limitation that the interviewee may not be giving you the true response. So we have to be cautious about those. Now, questionnaire is another method of primary source of data collection. Or questionnaire is also called another tool of data collection. So in questionnaire, you might personally administer it, or you could send it through email, or you could electronically administer it, or you can also send it through post. So postal mailing is also another way of doing it. Traditionally, we were either using personally administering the questionnaire. You would go to a respondent, hand over the printout of your questionnaire, ask him to fill it in, and then you would collect later on. That's called personally administered. Sending through email, you could even send an attachment, email attachment, or you could send a web link which contains your questionnaire form in the electronic form, and then you would ask them to fill it in. Electronically administered, it could be like using a web questionnaire, or something like Google form. You could use many other commercial services where uh, online data collection devices are made available. Now, we will see in one of the classes as to how we can prepare a questionnaire and upload them on any web-based services. So let's move to the next tool called observation schedule. Now, observation is a very, very important tool of data collection, which is most frequently used in operations research. Of course, it could be used in other management functions also, but it is more popularly used in uh, production management or operations management. Observation could be collected using videotaping or audio recording, and using variety of other methods like using cameras, by which you can collect information about how people are performing their jobs, how machines are operating, how patterns are existing, how uh, quality is improving, how wastage is generated, how wastage can be minimized. These are some of the data points which could be collected using all these uh, tools. Now, observation could also be carried out in two formats, namely participant observation and non-participant observation. In participant observation, the researcher would be participating along with the respondents in a classroom session, and then he would observe the things and then collect the data. Whereas in non-participant observation, the researcher or the field investigator would be anonymous. He would be sitting some corner which the participants may not be knowing about him, and therefore the data collected anonymously. Now, why do we do this? In participant observation, if respondents would know that you are the researcher, they might be mimicking or they might be faking. Whereas in non-participant observations, people wouldn't know they are being observed, so therefore they may be very natural in producing their behaviors. So therefore, non-participant observation is more popular than the participant observation. You can also collect that in the first trimester you would have come across a concept called Hawthorne experiments in Principles of Management subject. Hawthorne experiments were conducted by participant observation, and therefore people knew that they are being watched, and therefore they produced. But and therefore the critics of Hawthorne experiments stated that the participants produced more because they are being observed. Therefore, they called it as Hawthorne effect, which is a negative concept. Hawthorne effect refers to that people produced or uh, people produced because they are being watched, which means it is not true. People were not natural in their work process or work performances because they were being observed. That was the critique of Hawthorne experiments. Now, I want you to learn about the advantages and disadvantages of all these methods from the books. And then next class, we will learn to construct a tool of data collection. And this is very important for you because our second assignment is based on this class. So I wish you
Hello, can you hear my voice? Can you hear my voice, everybody? I think Murli was telling that there's a problem with the audio. Check, check. Can you hear my voice now? Everybody, can you hear my voice? Okay, so we had just seen uh, the sources of information, and then just one word of advice before we move on to the tomorrow session. I think today is so exhaustive, so I think tomorrow fresh will have continuous 2 hours on construction of the tool and so on. So I will let you know what actually the topic is going to be. But in the meantime, let's conclude with the today's session on how to prepare the questions while you're getting ready for your data collection. So first one is avoid technical language. So never use jargons, never use technical words, assuming that the common man may not understand your language. Then avoid highbrow questions, which are basically called repeatedly asked questions, and then never put questions which are being repeated. So and then next one is avoid ambiguity. So particularly when you are putting compound sentences, people will not be able to understand in your question. So put very plain, simple sentences, and then avoid bias. Never put questions which are very sentimentally affecting people. So, what is your opinion about your family members? If you put these kind of questions, they are all biased. So, what is your opinion about Pakistanis? What is your opinion about certain people? So, if you put questions like this, they are called biased questions. Never put those kind of questions. Then, in which case, how to put them, we will see that in the demonstration. Then, avoid generalizations. So, don't put questions in such a way that you are pulling the respondent to accept whatever is there in the question. So, never put those kind of questions. It say that all Indians are very friendly people. That's called generalization. So never put like that. What is your opinion about Indians? If you put that is called biased question. Indians are bad is a biased question. Pakistanis are good. It's a biased question. And then avoid double questions, which means never put two ideas at a time in a question. Never put two ideas in a question. For example, how would you like the taste and the color of Pepsi? That's a biased question. So we can avoid those kind of questions. Then avoid negative questions. That means the answers are always in the negative. Do you disagree with so and so people? If you put questions like that, people will always have something sort of, they'll feel so uncomfortable answering those kind of questions. Then avoid hypothetical questions. That is, people are expected to assume in such questions. So what is your assumption about so and so? These are all very difficult questions for our common men. Then long-winded questions. So it's like, the theme, the purpose for which you're putting a question is dragging. So never put those kind of questions. So therefore, you have to be very careful about some of these while preparing the questions. Tomorrow, anyway, in the next class, as I am demonstrating how to prepare a questionnaire, it becomes more easier. And then, particularly, you have to take care of the language. Then, do you think people can really understand the difficulty level of the questions? So even the average man or the common man should be able to understand the questions. And then sometimes what happens, people get tired reading and answering those questions because it is never ending. So never design questionnaires in such a way that it looks very bulky, and then it looks so many questions, and then people get tired. And then you have to design questions in such a way that the respondents should be willing to cooperate with you as a researcher. And then ease of recording. So how would participants or respondents give answers to your questions? So if the answers are zigzag, it will be very difficult for you later on to enter them into computer. So you should develop a system in such a way that all answers are lined one by one in the printout, so that when respondent is answering every question, the answers are very clearly visible in one column, so that while entering the data into computer, it would be so visible and so clearer for anybody. Then carefully give coding. For example, if the answer is yes or no, yes should be 1, no should be 2. Those numbers have to be very clearly specified. Otherwise, data entry operator will give whatever is answered there in the question paper or the questionnaire. So if there is yes, he will type it yes. But later on, you have to convert them into yes equals to 1, no equals to 2. So avoid all these things. Then there should not be monotony as they are reading the questions. So designing the questions is in such a way that every question should be interesting for the reader. Avoid that. I've already repeatedly said that avoid all kinds of bias in the question formation, the sentence formation, the word selection of the words. Any word which is harmful to the reader, you have to avoid those kind of words, particularly when you're talking about how people are here, how people are there. When you're comparing, it becomes very biased. So therefore, you can avoid those kind of questions. So with that, we will discontinue the topic for today, and then we'll come back tomorrow and see more on the sources of information. I think we still have many more, because in this let us say step 5, I suppose, acquiring empirical data, we have already seen in the first slide the concept of measurement, then sampling, special scaling techniques, and then we have to see that concept of measurement is going to be very complicated. So we will see that subsequently. So I hope today we have done some work. I'm not sure fully justified, owing to some constraints from my side, but and then I'm apologizing for it. So tomorrow we'll be back with more elaborate content. So I hope you will have them. But in the meantime, Murli or somebody should take care of the uh, collection of all the assignments from each one of you and forward it to me through email. Because if you're not doing it, you will not be able to practice what we are learning. So I am only practicing what I am doing. That means I am demonstrating my project. I have already demonstrated what is my topic. I have already demonstrated my problem formulation. But tomorrow I'm going to demonstrate. I think we have 2 hour session tomorrow. So I'll try to demonstrate construction of the questionnaire, how to design it. So you would get an impression. But if you are not ready with your assignments, I don't think you will be catching up with me tomorrow. So I am moving forward because the time doesn't wait for anybody, and you are lagging behind. So take care of that and then start working over. So until then, all the best. Have a nice day.